Let us discuss about the historical backgrounds of our constitution. Government of India Act of 1919. This act was also known as Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. Montagu was the Secretary of State for India and the Chelmsford was the Viceroy of India at that time. This act relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. The central and the provincial legislatures were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. Even though this central control relaxed, the structure of the government continued to be centralized and unitary. This act further divided the provincial subjects into two parts, transferred and reserved. Transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of ministers responsible to the legislative council. But the reserved subjects, on the other hand, were to be administered by the governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. This dual scheme of governance was known as diarchy. That's a double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. Government of India Act of 1919 introduced for the first time bicameralism and a direct election in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house and a lower house. The majority of the members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. This act required that the three of the six members of the Viceroy's Executive Council were to be Indian, and it extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorate for six Indian Christian, Anglo Indians, and Europeans. And this act granted franchise to the limited number of people on the basis of property, tax, and education. Government of India Act of 1919 created a new office of the High Commissioner for India in London and transferred to him some of the functions performed by the Secretary of State for India. And this act provided for the establishment of a public service commission, and hence they set up a central public service commission in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. And this one, for the first time, it separated the provincial budget from the central budget and authorized the provincial legislatures to enact their budget. It provided for the appointment of a statutory commission. This is to inquire into the report on its working. Next is Simon Commission. In November 1927, the British government announced the appointment of a seven-member statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of India under its new constitution. But all the members of the Simon Commission were Britishers, and hence all the parties boycotted the commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930, and some recommendations were the abolition of diarchy, extension of responsible government in the provinces, the establishment of a federation of British India and princely states, continuation of communal electorate, and so on. To consider the proposal of the Commission, the British government convened three roundtable conferences of the representatives of British government, British India, and the Indian princely states. On the basis of this discussion, a white paper on the constitutional reforms was prepared. The recommendations of this committee were incorporated in the NIST Government of India Act of 1935. Next one is Communal Award. In August 1932, Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, he announced a scheme of representation of the minorities, which came to be known as Communal Award. The award was not only continued the separate electorate for Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christian, Anglo Indians, and Europeans, but also extended it to depressed classes also. Gandhiji was distressed over this extension, and he undertook fast until death in the Erwada jail to get the award modified. At last, there was an agreement between the leaders of Congress and the depressed classes. This agreement was known as the Pune Pact, and it retained the Hindu joint electorate and get reserved seats to the depressed classes. Next one is Government of India Act of 1935. The act marked a second milestone towards a completely responsible government in India. It established All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as units. Act divided the powers between the center and units in terms of three lists. They were federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list. Federalist for the center, provincialist for the provinces, and a concurrent one for both the center and provinces. Government of India Act of 1935 it gave residuary powers to the Viceroy. However, the federation never came into being as the princely state did not join with it. This act abolished diarchy in the provinces and introduced the provincial autonomy in its place. The provinces were allowed to act as autonomous units of administration in their defined spheres. The act introduced a responsible government in provinces, that is, the governor was required to act with the advice of ministers responsible to the provincial legislature. This came into effect in 1937 and was discontinued in 1939. Government of India Act of 1935 provided for the adoption of diarchy at center. Consequently, the federal subjects were divided into reserved subjects and transfer subjects. This act extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed classes, women, and labor. It abolished the Council of India established by the Government of India Act of 1858, and it introduced the bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. Thus, the legislatures of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, and United Provinces were made bicameral, consisting of Legislative Council and Legislative Assembly. Government of India Act of 1935 it extended the franchise. About 10% of the total population got the voting right. It provided for the establishment of a Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. And it provided for the establishment of not only the Federal Public Service Commission but also a provincial and a joint public service commission for 2 or more provinces. It provided for the establishment of a federal court which was set up in 1937. Next one is the background of Indian Independence Act of 1947. On February 20th, 1947, the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the British rule in India would end by June 30, 1948, after which the power would be transferred to the responsible Indian hands. But the announcement was followed by agitation by the Muslim League demanding the partition of that country. Again on June 3, 1947, the British government made it clear that any constitution framed by the Constituent Assembly of India cannot apply to those parts of the country which were unwilling to accept that. On the same day, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, put forth the partition plan. It's known as Mountbatten Plan. This plan was accepted by the Congress and the Muslim League. Immediate effect was given to the plan by enacting the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Indian Independence Act of 1947. It ended the British rule in India and declared India as an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. It provided for the partition of India and the creation of 2 independent dominions of India and Pakistan with the right to secede from British Commonwealth. It abolished the office of Viceroy and provided for each dominion a Governor General who was to be appointed by the British King on the advice of the Dominion Cabinet. His Majesty's government in Britain was to have no responsibility with respect to the government of India or Pakistan. Indian Independence Act of 1947 it empowered the constituent assemblies of the 2 dominions to frame and adopt any constitution for their respective nations and to repeal any act of the British Parliament, including the Independence Act itself. And it empowered the constituent assemblies of both the dominions to legislate for their respective territories till the new constitution were drafted and enforced. No act of the British Parliament passed after August 15, 1947 was to extend to either of the 2 new dominions. It abolished the office of the Secretary of State for India and transferred his function to the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Affairs. Indian Independence Act of 1947 it proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over the Indian princely states and tribal areas from August 15, 1947. It granted freedom to the Indian princely states either to join Dominion of India or Dominion of Pakistan or to be remain independent. It provided for the governance of each of the dominion and provinces by the Government of India Act of 1935 till the new constitution were framed. It deprived the British monarch of his right to veto bills or ask for the reservation of certain bills for his approval, but this right was reserved for the Governor General. This act designated the Governor General of India and provincial governors as the constitutional head of the state. They were made to act on the advice of the respective Council of Ministers in all the matters. Under this act dropped the title of Emperor of India from the royal titles of King of England. This act discontinued the appointment to civil services and the reservation of post by the Secretary of State for India. The members of the civil services appointed before August 15, 1947 would continue to enjoy all the benefits that they were entitled to till that time. In 1947, British rule came to an end and the power was transferred to two new independent dominions of India and Pakistan. Lord Mountbatten became the first Governor General and Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister of independent India. The Constituent Assembly of India formed in 1946 became the Parliament of Indian Dominion.